Is the recording working? Not. Thank you. Okay, good evening, everyone, and nice to be back in action after. Thank you very much. Thank you. Nice to be back after our own break. And for those who are on Zoom and watching later on YouTube, I just posted in the chat a link to the handout, and I'll put that on the YouTube link also. So I wanted to speak about Pesach Sheni. Even though this was advertised under false pretenses as a Parsha share, I thought it's an interesting chance for us to speak about Pesach Sheni. My notes showed that I spoke about Pesach Sheni also about a year ago on Parsha's Parsha. I looked at it from a very different angle. That's the Parsha where Pesach Sheni comes, indeed. But I spoke about it from a completely different angle to the way I'm going to address it today. And tomorrow evening, Thursday evening, turning into Friday, is Pesach Sheni. So we'll also try and discuss the various minhagim that are associated with how we keep Pesach Sheni. And I labelled the share Pesach without the hard work, because it's a chance to enjoy some aspects of Pesach, at least, without too much Pesach cleaning, as we'll shortly see. So Pesach Sheni is, first of all, it's an extraordinary mitzvah. It's a very unusual mitzvah. It's one of perhaps the only mitzvah, depending how you define these things, in which there's the possibility of a catch-up, a sort of chance to make up a mitzvah. You missed it the first time round because you were unable to bring the Korban Pesach. Let's have a look actually at source one. So source one tells us about a group of individuals who were unable to bring the Korban Pesach at the right time, because as Pasuk 6 says, they were unclean. In other words, they were tommy from impure due to contact with a dead body. And someone who's tommy, someone who's ritually impure, is unable to bring the Korban Pesach. So they came, Pasuk 7, and they came and complained to Moshe. Loma nigora, they said, these men said to Moshe, we're ritually pure. Loma nigora, why should we be worse off? They didn't say, great, we've got an opportunity to get an early night and not have to stay up Seder night and eat Korban Pesach because we're exempt from the mitzvah. Said, Loma nigora, why should we miss out on this spiritual opportunity? Moshe responds in Pasuk Ches, Moshe imdu v'eshma ma'yitzav Hashem alchem. Let's wait and see what Hashem says. Pasuk 10, at 9, Hashem appears to Moshe. Pasuk 10, speak, Dabel b'nei Yisrael lemor, ish ki yatomei nefesh b'derech choykolachem, whether now or in future generations, if you're unable to bring the Korban Pesach because you are impure or far away, the Korban Pesach is brought in Yerushalayim. Pasuk Yud Aleph, b'chodesh Hasheni, in the second month, on the 14th of Nisan, you can bring the Korban Pesach. So 14th of Iyar, So 14th of Nisan, in the afternoon of Erev Pesach, you bring the Korban Pesach. Pesach Sheni is on the 14th of Iyar, such in the afternoon you bring the Korban Pesach, such that that night is the second Seder night, as it were, for those who missed the first time round, and they can bring a Korban Pesach. That's the concept of Pesach Sheni. Last year, or about a year ago, Parsha's Parsha, we looked at in depth who these individuals were and the various suggestions. I just printed it as Chazorah. This is source 2, the Medrash, who says that either they were those who were carrying the coffin of Yosef, or these were those who had the difficult task of being the Chevra Kadisha for the burial of the two sons of Aaron, who died recently in the reading of the Torah, or they were just a Meis Mitzvah. There was someone else who died in the mitzvah who they had the mitzvah of burying. So we discussed that in detail on Parsha's Parsha. Quick plug, nowadays, post-COVID, where I record my shiurim, so it's available on YouTube to listen to that share. But here we're not going to focus on that. So in brief, there are individuals who are unable to bring their Korban Pesach the first time round, and they get given a second time round chance to do the mitzvah. This is the concept of Pesach Sheni. So why is Pesach unique in this respect? So either it represents the uniqueness of Pesach. Pesach is the national covenant with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's our founding mitzvah, bringing the Korban Pesach. And therefore, those who haven't got the opportunity to bring the Korban Pesach bring it on, or given a Pesach Sheni. That's one way of understanding it. We'll see later, without giving away the punchline too much, we'll consider whether we might still have the chance to bring a Pesach Sheni this year, if Moshiach were to come in the next 48 hours or so, would we have the opportunity of bringing the Pesach Sheni still now? But there is a source which we'll see that discusses that perhaps every ger, every convert, should bring a Pesach Sheni with their conversion, because this is how you sort of enter into the relationship with Hashem. So this is perhaps the reason why Pesach Sheni has such significance. It's the one unique mitzvah which is so foundational that it's given a tashlumim, it's given a chance of compensation. Yes?
So various other korbanos that we, if we had the opportunity to bring them as well.
Yes.
And if you are Tommy, if you've got too much mates, you can't bring it.
Yes.
Do you ever get a second chance for any of the other korbanos?
Okay, so it's a good question. Pesach Sheni is in some respects unique in that, in a sense, it's a communal offering, but equally every individual brings it. Now, if for some reason the community was unable to bring the Musaf Korban on Sukkot, and half a year passes, and now they've got the opportunity to bring it, there's no Sukkot Sheni, there's no second chance to bring that Korban. Sukkot has passed, and you've lost the mitzvah. In that respect, Pesach Sheni is unique. Now, if you have a private obligation to bring a Korban and you're unable to bring it because you're Tomei or you don't have the resources, or whatever it may be, let's say someone has sinned and they have to bring a Korban chatos, so fine, so they can't bring it when they can't bring it, and when they cease being Tomei, then they would bring their Korban chatos. So the concept of making up a missed opportunity isn't relevant there because there's no set time. Korban Pesach is unique in that it's a Korban sibur, albeit brought by every individual, not by the community as a whole, and nonetheless, and it's time bound, thank you, yeah, and therefore, and nonetheless, it has the compensation opportunity. The Gemara, by the way, brings one of the Amoraim said that he kept a diary in which he recorded every accidental aveira that he did, of which he was aware, so that when Moshiach comes, we'll be able to bring appropriate Korban chatos for all of those. And there's a discussion in the postscript whether this is indeed is a halachic obligation. Moshiach comes, we'll all have to purchase, I assume, fairly vast numbers, unfortunately, of animals in order to bring our korbanos to make up our missed Korban chatos or not. But either way, the concept normally isn't relevant, but it is particularly relevant over here. Okay, so that's one suggestion as to the uniqueness of the Pesach. There are a number of sort of hashkafic thoughts. I will try later and get to some of the halachas around Korban Pesach, and some of them are a little technical. Pesach Sheni, I'll try and focus for a few moments on some of the technical halachas of Pesach Sheni, and then I'll try and reflect on some of the minhagim that we have around keeping it. But for now, just sort of thinking philosophically around ideas of Pesach Sheni, there are a number of other suggestions. I mean, when you read the psukim, it sounds like Pesach Sheni was only given as a mitzvah to the Jewish people, and because they asked for it. So had they not asked for it, if you read the pasuk in Pshut Shel Mikra, in the simplest reading of the psukim, they would never have had this mitzvah. So maybe that's the answer as to what's unique about Pesach, that they asked for it for whatever reason. They were particularly upset about it. These were great individuals. They had sprung forward to do a mitzvah, either the mitzvah of carrying Yosef's coffin, or burying the tragic sons of Aaron, or a mace mitzvah, a person who had no one else to bury them, a person without anyone else who cared enough to bury them. So maybe these were enthusiastic individuals, and in the zchus, in the merit of these individuals, a new mitzvah was generated, the opportunity of a Pesach Sheni. That's how some understand it. The Bali Musa, in line with that, used to draw sort of great inspiration from this idea. The Bali Musa, those who focused on ethical development, and they basically said, you see from this that Ein Dov Omed Levnei Haratzon. If you're determined enough, you can succeed. There's been quite a lot of discussion in America recently over the idea of success and failure. If you try hard enough, will you always succeed? There was a celebrity who spoke about this, and quite a broad discussion going on around these interesting ideas. It's a little bit of a dangerous message to give. If you're determined enough, you'll succeed. But there is some value to it that one can achieve perhaps more than one realizes if one's determined enough. So the Bali Musa speak about this in the context of Pesach Sheni also. Interestingly, Rashi, and I hope I printed Rashi. Did I print Rashi? Yes, I did print Rashi in the middle of page 1. Rashi understands not like that. Rashi says the mitzvah was anyway going to be given, Pesach Sheni. No matter what, the mitzvah was going to be given. However, these people leaped in and got the chance to generate the mitzvah through their enthusiasm. So a quick look at Rashi at the end of source 1. they said to Moshe, Lama Nigora, why should we be inferior? Why should we suffer because of our Tumah status? Said Moshe, there's nothing they can do. Ain't Kodshim craving Tumah. You can't bring a carbon in Tumah. Omrulo, so they said, let's become ritually clear. Forgive us paraduma. Yizorik damalenu bekonim tahorim yachad. Sorry, they said, let Kohanim bring it, and they can organize the Korban Pesach, even though we're ritually unclear, etc. Moshe said, Imzu b'eshma, let's wait and see. Like a student who's confident to hear in front of their teacher. How fortunate is Moshe that he could be so confident? Hashem would answer him at his request. But then Rashi concludes this portion, the end of Rashi, this portion could have been said through Moshe like the rest of the Torah. But these people merited that this Torah should be brought about through them. Those who are meritorious are granted further merits. In other words, really, this is a piece of Torah like any other Torah, according to Rashi. This was always destined to be the halacha, but they leaped forward. Their enthusiasm meant that they had the privilege of generating a new piece of Torah in their merit. Who does this remind us of, by the way? Another group of people who stepped forward, the daughters of Selachot, absolutely, who again had the merit of a piece of Torah being given through them. The laws of inheritance for women presumably would have had to be given at some point in time. There are people who have daughters who inherit as not sons, and halacha has to be said around that. But the Bnei Selachot and the enthusiasm for Eretz Yisrael had the privilege of generating a section of Torah. So this is somewhat analogous to that. That this is a piece of Torah that is generated through their enthusiasm. This is how Rashi learns. So according to Rashi, this isn't a sort of demonstration of determination having good outcomes, because anyway this was going to happen. It wasn't that their enthusiasm created a new mitzvah. It was simply their enthusiasm meant that they were the ones who the mitzvah was privileged. So that Rashi would disagree with the Baalei Mussar, the ethical thinkers who see in this a proof of the power of determination. There is I think this is the first time ever I've printed a source in Yiddish at the bottom of page 1, and I'll explain to you what this source is. When the Lubavitcher Rebbe arrived in America in the 40s, he was not yet the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he was the son-in-law of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he embarked on various educational projects. And one of those that he did was create a calendar with a thought for the day sort of idea, in which he used to spread Chabad teachings. And at the time, he printed it in Yiddish, because that was the spoken language of many of the refugees. And since then, Chabad, of course, has reissued it however many hundreds of times in Ivrit and in English and in presumably 40 other languages. But this is a beautiful little work which has a synopsis of a lot of Chabad Torah. And he writes, in the right, I left the Yiddish in just because it amused me, but in the left, I put it in English. Pesach Sheni in Yono is, says the idea of Pesach Sheni is it's never too late. It's always possible to put things right. Even if one was Tomei or far away, even if this was deliberate, nonetheless, it can be corrected. So the Lubavitcher Rebbe sees in this, the youthful Lubavitcher Rebbe, sees in this a teaching of the power of it's never too late, a very beautiful idea. Missed opportunities, you can make them up. Even if one is ritually impure and or far away, nonetheless, and even if it's deliberate, by the way. So the halacha is, what happens if you miss the Pesach Rishon deliberately? You chose not to travel to Yerushalayim, or you chose not to purify yourself, you couldn't be bothered, whatever it may be. And then in between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni, one had a return, a teshuvah, then you could engage in the Pesach Sheni. So that's the message that the Lubavitcher Rebbe sees in this as a sort of power and inspirational message of hope. There's a very, very interesting section of Zohar that also discusses the significance of Pesach Sheni. I'm not going to go too much into the history of the different parts of the Zohar, but basically in much of the Zohar, the main characters of Shimon Bar Yochai, who those who are Kabbalistically inclined will celebrate on Lag BaOmer, the revelation of the Zohar that took place at the time of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and so on and so forth. But there's a section of Zohar called Reya Mehemna, which means faithful friend, which is midrashim around Moshe Rabbeinu teachings, midrashic teachings associated with Moshe Rabbeinu himself. Very interesting. And there, the Zohar asks the question, and it says, I don't understand how you can bring a Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni isn't Nisan. It's not the month of Geula. It's not the time of redemption. So what sort of korban are you bringing? If we understand that the spiritual pursuits of Yom Tov are because one's sort of associating oneself with the spiritual revelations appropriate at the time, then Nisan is the Chodesh HaGeula, is the Pesach, is the Chag HaGeula. What does it mean? It's a very interesting question. What does it mean to bring a question I never really thought about before? But what does it mean to have Pesach Sheni? What are the spiritual emanations associated with Pesach Sheni? So Zohar is notoriously hard to learn, and I didn't know exactly how to read the Zohar. It seems to give it says two comments on this question, and I'm not sure if they're two answers or somehow linked. The first answer it says is that the spiritual emanations of times always linger 30 days or after the festival. So since we're still 30 days after Pesach, it still is sort of in the spiritual lights and revelations of Pesach are still lingering in the atmosphere, and therefore one can still attach oneself to it. But then it says, very interesting idea. It seems to take the idea of someone who is ritually impure or far metaphorically. Pesach comes, and not everyone can associate themselves to the message of Pesach. Some of us are sadly ritually impure or far away. We're not close to Pesach. We're not attached to Pesach, and we're not able to tap in to the spiritual influence of Pesach. Now, always in life, there's times of divine inspiration, and then there's an illumination, an opportunity, and then there's times of consolidation and the hard plodding work. In a sense, we're aware of this at this time of year because Pesach is complete inspiration. The Jews were there in Egypt, and they were almost passive, and they were granted this incredible experience of being taken out of Mitzrayim, and the Makkos, the plagues happen, and they see miracles. They haven't really earned it in any particular way. Then the Sphira happens, which are days of plodding hard work, and then Shavuos, when we can enter into a sort of more covenantal relationship with Hashem, almost a relationship of not equals, but a two-way relationship in some particular way. So the Zohar and the Mekubalim in general look a lot at this sort of balancing act between what they call chesed and din. Chesed is overflowing kindness, and then din is the responsibility to earn it. We have that in the cycle of the year, like a Pesach followed, a Nisan followed by an Iyar, and we have that in our lives. We have times of inspiration where, for whatever reason, everything seems to be going well, and we just feel illuminated, and maybe our emunah is very strong, maybe we're experiencing great simcha, and everything's fantastic. And then the times of struggle where we have to sort of put in the hard work. And the positive spin on this is that this hard work is a time of consolidation, and in a way we achieve things ourselves. So the Zohar sees this as the dynamic between Nisan and Iyar. Nisan is this time of great illumination. The Omer is the time of difficulty. I mean, we know that it's got a tapping into mourning. The Omer, it's got an Avelus associated with it. It's got a time of danger. So this is the sort of shift between Nisan and Iyar. And the Zohar says that the Iyar is the Pesach for those that don't do well. Iyar is the Pesach for those that aren't privileged to have the illumination of Nisan, but can now tap into Iyar and achieve something through that. When those who are Tomei or B'derech Haruka, those who are impure or far away, they can sort of draw inspiration from the Iyar illumination. And the Hasidic thinkers cite a Mishnah, a very interesting Mishnah, which I printed in source 4 at the top of page 2. And the Mishnah says that Ma bein Pesach Rishon Sheni. What's the difference between first Pesach and second Pesach? And it says on the first Pesach, at the time of the slaughtering, it's prohibited to own chometz. The pasuk says, "Bali Yirah, Bali Matzah," it shouldn't be seen and it shouldn't be found. But on the second Pesach, it's permissible to have both chometz and matzah with a person in the home. And then it says there are similarities between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. Pesach Rishon has Hallel and Pesach Sheni has Hallel. Both times it has to be eaten with matzah and maror. They both supersede Shabbat and so on and so forth. We'll look maybe at some of these things later. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us that whilst there is much that is similar in the way that Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni is brought. It's unique in that even though the Pesach Sheni is eaten with matzah, nonetheless you can have chametz lying around. There's no Pesach cleaning associated with it, which is also why I called Pesach Sheni Pesach without the hard work. So even if you bring Pesach Sheni, you still have the chametz around. So the Hasidic thinkers see in that a sort of symbolism. A Pesach Rishon, the first Pesach, is this time of purity. It's for those who can rid themselves of chometz. They have none of the negativity of chometz associated, right? We speak about chometz symbolically, the ego and the Yitzhak and other such things. And they have this pure, rarefied Pesach, which is kulo matzah, as we say on Seder night, right? It's just matzah. By the way, the commentaries speak about this on the Mishnah. Only matzah. What do you mean? Pesach Sheni also? No, Pesach Sheni is not only matzah. Pesach Sheni, you have a mitzvah to have Korban Pesach, you have a mitzvah to matzah, but next to you on the table can be someone who's having bread. So Pesach Sheni is the Pesach of those who aren't up to getting a full Pesach. That's the Pesach of those who only get a second best Pesach, but nonetheless they have a chance to draw some inspiration for Pesach. These are the people who can't have matzah and chometz, who can't rid themselves of chometz and only have matzah, but they can still have matzah in the thing. So it's a sort of I guess in line with the Chabad, second chance past Yom Tov. It's a second chance, even those who can't afford can't attach themselves to the purity of Pesach.
So Pesach Sheni itself is just the evening meal.
Correct. Yes.
All
it is evening
meal with matzah and
yes.
And the korban.
Yes.
So the time you get to one morning, you can't keep it overnight because it
correct.
goes down by the
So 14th of Pesach, so Thursday this year, Thursday night to Friday. Friday afternoon they would bring the Korban Pesach, and then Friday night they would do a Seder. And in that Seder, they would be able to own chametz also. No.
The Seder, essentially, as the Gemara recognizes it.
Not a full Seder. They would have Korban Pesach with matzah and maror. Yeah.
That's all they do.
Correct. That's all they would do.
No Kiddush. They do that. Other than Friday night Kiddush in this country.
There's no mitzvah superiority at the time then. Correct.
It's just to eat the mitzvah.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Because at least, you say all the work, etc., but that is part of bringing it onto the crescendo of then Seder and the Korban and everything else that goes with actually the Tzipor Yetziat Mitzrayim, all of the whole process.
So there's a semi-Hasidic thinker called Rabbi Gedalia Shur in Ur Gedalia, who says this. He sort of says the same idea as Isaiah, but the opposite way around. He says he views the Pesach Sheni as the way of attaching oneself to Pesach. Those who are really strong. They were Tomei and Derech Rechoka. They didn't get the lift of Pesach and inspiration, and nonetheless, through their sheer hard work, they attach themselves to it. He ties this into why is this mitzvah taught by those why is it that of all mitzvahs this was the one that was generated by people asking for it? Because this is the Pesach for enthusiasts, those who don't have the lift of Nisan, and are still able to attach themselves to Pesach. Exactly right. They don't have the Seder night. They don't have all the apparatus to get themselves there. So he takes the same idea with a positive spin. The Zohar seems to take the idea with a negative spin. It's for the weeds. Right, it's for those who aren't strong enough to attach themselves to a real Pesach. They're Tomei and Derech Rechoka, they're far away, and nonetheless they're given a chance to get a second best Pesach. That's how the Zohar takes it. So two different angles on a similar sort of similar idea. Okay, so this is these are some thoughts around Pesach Sheni and a sort of symbolic. Symbolism, as it were, behind this idea of those who are far away, and this idea that the Pesach Sheni uniquely is brought for those who are is mixed with chometz. It's when you bring the Pesach Sheni, you're allowed to own chometz. I want to try and focus now for a few minutes on. I hope this won't be too technical, but a little bit of a technical analysis of some of the halachas of Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. And I hope out of that draw some interesting ideas. I'll start off by quoting a Gemara in source 5. It's a Gemara in Pesachim, Daf Kuf Tesvav, page 115 in Pesachim. And this Gemara is somewhat familiar to us because we mention a part of it on Seder night. I've spoken before about the Haggadah. The genius of the Haggadah is that basically it's cut and paste from Ma'amorei Chazal and other sources, and and built in a very interesting way. Now, we eat on Seder night matzah, then we eat morrow. We sadly don't eat Korban Pesach, of course. And then we eat matzah and morrow together. Zeicher lemikdash k'hillel. Kein osa hillel, b'zman shebeis hamikdash haya kayom. So Hillel was of the opinion that at the time of the Beis Hamikdash, Pesach, matzah, and morrow were all eaten together in a korach. Korach we translate as a sandwich, but it actually means a roll because, of course, they were using soft matzahs, a bit like the luffers that you can still buy to this day. So they would wrap the soft matzah, like Sfardi matzahs nowadays, around the Korban Pesach and the morrow. So you'd have almost a luffer, right? It would be matzah wrap on the outside and roast lamb in the middle with morrow herbs. And that's how Hillel held that the matzah should be eaten. And in memory of Hillel, we eat matzah a second way like that. Okay, so that's what we do on Seder night. Let's analyze this a little bit. And this is source 5, in which the Gemara analyzes what's really going on over here. And basically, the Gemara says that this revolves around a pasuk that's quoted by the Gemara and quoted in the Haggadah. The pasuk says, "Al matzos u'merorim yochlu." The Korban Pesach, should be eaten in conjunction with matzah and morrow. Al matzos u'merorim yochlu. On matzah and morrow, it should be eaten. So the Korban Pesach should be eaten together with matzah and morrow. Now, the majority opinion, the Rabbanon, think that simply means that they should all be eaten. And therefore you eat Pesach, and you eat matzah, and you eat morrow, which is the core halacha. However, Hillel is of the view that the translation or explanation of the pasuk of al matzos umrorim yochluhu means the Korban Pesach should be eaten with matzah and morrow, i.e. all together, hence his korach, his sandwich stroke wrap. That's what the Gemara says. And then the Gemara gets into discussion as to whether, according to the Rabbanon, there's any reason not to eat all three together. Okay, they don't hold you have to eat all three together, but why not just eat all three together? And that way, avoid the debate and fulfill both versions. And the Gemara introduces a concept of mitzvahs mavaklos zuesu, that mitzvahs negate each other. They nullify each other. So we're familiar with the concept of bittul when it comes to prohibitions. So if a splatter of milk falls into your large cholent pot, if we know that it is nullified, bottle, in shishim, so it has no effect on the taste, in 60, then it's nullified, you don't need to worry about it. Is there a semi-equivalent idea with mitzvahs? So do you have to be concerned that if you're eating Pesach, matzah, and morrow together, that you're not fulfilling any of the mitzvahs appropriately? Because the Pesach is nullified by the matzah, and the matzah is nullified by the morrow, and the morrow is nullified by the Pesach, etc. In other words, you're not engaging directly with any of them because you're having them as a mixture. Now, the exact mechanism that the Gemara means when it considers this possibility of bittul is not entirely clear. Does it mean because against any one food there's a roiv, a majority against it? So when you're having matzah, there's morah and Pesach against it. When you're having Pesach, you've got matzah and morah against it and so on. So there's always a majority. Or is it that when you chew a sandwich or a mixture, inevitably, there'll never be equal amounts in your mouth. And therefore, there's a good chance that for any one mouthful, there'll be a minority of any one ingredient against a majority of others. Or is it even without that we're just worried about a mixture? There's a lot that's unclear about this Gemara and a lot of debate exactly how to understand the Gemara. There's certainly no shishim over here, right? There's not a question of taste being nullified, but nonetheless a weaker form of nullification, which is bittul b'roiv, a nullification of the majority. And therefore the Rabbanon are perhaps concerned with this bittul cancellation of mitzvahs, and Hillel isn't concerned about it, either because he doesn't hold there's such a concept at all, or because this is the very way the pasuk says that the mitzvah should be done. Sorry.
Yeah, the opposite effectively of bundling mitzvahs together.
eating months on its own.
Yes. 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 Okay, well, very, very good question. I wasn't going to go into it, but since you raised it, there is another concept of einos in mitzvahs, chavilas. Don't do mitzvahs as bundles. In other words, it's a disrespect for mitzvahs just to try and pack as many as possible in on one go. So I don't know if you have a wedding and a bris milah and don't make one seudah for them, etc. Ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha, perhaps a similar concept. It would seem that these are not concepts which would negate the fulfillment of the mitzvah. They are simply a lack of respect for a mitzvah. So it's true, don't bundle mitzvahs together. It's a lack of respect for the mitzvah, but the Gemara has graver concerns over here that maybe you haven't even fulfilled the mitzvah if you quite literally make a wrap together, because you're not engaged with specific eating matzah and you're not engaged with specifically eating maror, because there's possibility of mitzvahs mevatla zua, so that mitzvahs, the two different mitzvah foods would cancel each other. So einos mitzvahs chavilos wouldn't negate the mitzvah; it'd simply be a lack of respect. And here the Gemara is considering a more serious issue of bittul, of negation of the mitzvah. So this is the technical Gemara in source 5. I think in the interest of time, actually, I'm not going to read my way through it, but this is what the Gemara says, and you can look at it at your leisure.
We are relying on Hillel Hazaki.
Yes.
In Korban and saying
yes.
We've all been doing as long as we can remember. But actually, the Gemara is arguing that actually Hillel's son,
descendant, yes.
Descendant, also Hillel.
Yes.
Then actually, maybe shouldn't be. This is not my view.
Yes. Indeed, there is a little confusion in the Gemara because it mentions two Hillels. Yeah. You're correct. The first Hillel is the first generation Amora, and he's arguing with Pat's arguing with his great grandfather, or not. Maybe even the elder Hillel agrees that mitzvahs normally cancel each other, but he's not concerned in this case because this is the way the pasuk says do it. Okay, just in the interest of avoiding confusion, just to summarize what we said. Hillel is of the view that the correct way to fulfill the mitzvahs is by bundling Pesach, Matzah, Maror together, and there is a concern about doing that if that isn't the way to do the mitzvah, because the possibility of eating the food negates each other. That's really the punchline of the Gemara, and the exact details of how to thrash all that out is rather technical. Okay, so that's the background of the Gemara. Now, there's another two pieces of information really that need to be presented over here, which is that Maror, if you look at the Pesukim, and I hope that I print the Pesukim. Yes, I did print the Pesukim. If you look at source 5, we have a number of source 5s, I've done an overlap. Like on page 3, source 5, my numbering has gone skew-if. Yeah, oh my goodness. Okay, I made a major mess of the numbers. If you look at page 3 in the handout, I'll leave the numbers aside. There is a Gemara in source 6 at the top of the page, which again, in the interest of time, I won't read inside. And there are the Pesukim printed in below that from Shemos Perek Yud, which are incorrectly numbered source 5. But I'll summarize outside, then we'll have a look at it inside. The Gemara argues that a careful reading of the Pesukim indicate that there is a mitzvah on Seder night to eat Korban Pesach, there is a mitzvah on Seder night to eat matzah, and there's a mitzvah on Seder night to eat the Pesach with maror. In other words, there is no independent mitzvah to eat maror on Seder night. But if you have Pesach, you should eat the Pesach with maror. Let's just have a brief look at the Pesukim, just to sort of just give us a clue as how the Gemara emerges with this. And this is on source 5 on page 3. Again, it's been misnumbered. I'll renumber them later. But for now, just middle of page 5, about a third of the way down. These are the Pesukim of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. Moshe tells the Jewish people who are going to go out, and in Pasuk 8 he says, they shall eat the flesh of the Korban Pesach on that night, sli eish, roasted in fire, or matzahs, al marom yochluhu, and on morrow they should be eaten. And then in Pasuk 18 he says, on the 14th, the night of the 14th, another Seder night, you should eat matzahs. So the Pesukim indicate to us that there is a mitzvah to eat matzah, there's a mitzvah to eat Pesach, and there is a mitzvah when you eat the Pesach to eat the morrow. In other words, meaning to say that nowadays we don't have the mitzvah of eating Korban Pesach, sadly, we can't eat Korban Pesach. We still have an independent mitzvah of eating matzah, and we don't have a mitzvah of eating morah, because morah is when you eat matzah, Pesach also eat morah. Why do we have morah nowadays? As a rabbinic mitzvah, again, in a sense, as a zeichen mikdash, as a remembrance of what would happen at the time of the mikdash. So just to summarize, because I want us to be clear on this, in the Pesach of Yetzias Mitzrayim, on Pesach, the real Pesach, Pesach Rishon, there's a mitzvah to eat Korban Pesach, there's a mitzvah to eat matzah, and when you eat the Korban Pesach, eat it with morah. What happens if you can't bring a Korban Pesach like nowadays? Then you have a mitzvah to eat matzah, you have a mitzvah to eat Pesach, which you can't do, and there's no mitzvah to eat morah, as far as Torah law is concerned, because you're not eating the Korban Pesach. But rabbinically, we eat morah.
In that Pesach, it says Tzli H Matzot.
Yes.
So can't we also learn after that you eat we know there's a specific achilat matzah mitzvah, but there seems to be also a link that you have matzah with your Korban Pesach as well.
Okay, so the passing of that pasuk is very unclear. Where do you put the comma in on that pasuk? In the interest of time, I printed the Ramban, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into it. You are correct, Andrew, to highlight that there's translation problems over here, depending where you put commas in the pasukim. I'm just presenting things as the conclusion is, and the Ramban speaks about the grammatical structure of that pasuk and where you put the comma in. So it's a fine point, but I'm in the interest of time, I'm going to leave it.
You need to eat matzah and Korban Pesach, but they don't have to be eaten.
Correct. The halachic conclusion is clear. How you group the pasuk and how you read the words is less than clear. And the Ramban gives two suggestions as to how to group the words. Okay, so which means to say that nowadays, even according to Hillel, we don't really have the wrap, because the whole logic of having the wrap is when you have a Korban Pesach, then together with the Korban Pesach, you eat the matzah and morah together with it. However, nowadays where we don't have a Korban Pesach is the unifying entity that joins the matzah and morah together, and therefore we're not able to eat it in we're not able to eat it in the wrap. That's what emerges in practical halacha, and that's why when we eat Hillel's sandwich, we reference zeichen mikdash Hillel, because even Hillel would agree that nowadays there's no point in having the wrap; it's only a zeichen mikdash. That's the background to how things work. The Pesach of Korban Pesach Sheni, however, is different, in which there's only a mitzvah to eat matzah and morah together with the Korban Pesach. In other words, is there a mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach Sheni for one who didn't bring a Korban Pesach on Pesach Rishon, and therefore has to bring a Pesach Sheni, or one who is unable to bring a Pesach Sheni, or one who was unable to eat matzah? Let's say first Pesach you were unwell and unable to eat any matzah, or you were stranded on a desert island and unable to get hold of matzah. And now Pesach Sheni comes round. Is there a concept of eating matzah? None whatsoever. It's only the Korban Pesach that has this idea of Pesach Sheni. So just to summarize that the halachic mechanism is clear. On Seder night, there's a mitzvah to eat Pesach, there's a mitzvah to eat matzah, and there's a mitzvah to eat the Pesach with matzah and morah. On Pesach Sheni, there's a mitzvah to bring the Korban Pesach if you didn't bring the first Korban Pesach, and to bring it with matzah and morah. But there's no independent mitzvah of eating matzah and morah by themselves. Only if you bring the Korban Pesach, then there's a mitzvah to eat matzah and morah. And this is the reason why nowadays we don't eat matzah as far as Torah law is concerned on Pesach Sheni, because, and even rabbinic law, because it's only when you bring the Korban Pesach you have the mitzvah to bring it. And this is also the reason why, if you didn't eat matzah on the first night of Pesach, so no, there are every year, inevitably in any community, people are in hospital Pesach, unable to eat, whatever it may be, they don't have a mitzvah to eat matzah on Pesach Sheni. This is what emerges basically from the sources that I printed at the top of page 3, the first half of page 3, looking at the psukim. Which leads us now into a little bit of a wonder, because Hillel quotes a pasuk to prove that you should eat the Pesach in a wrap together with the matzah and the morah. And which pasuk does he quote? And the answer is he quotes the pasuk in Ba'alosecha, the pasuk of Pesach Sheni, al matzah samroim yochlu, when he could have as well quoted the pasuk that we just read now, which says that with Pesach Rishon, there's also a mitzvah to eat Pesach, the Pesach with matzah and maror. So just to summarize the sort of second half of the shir, what I wanted to focus on is a very technical question, but I hope I will share with you that it brings out an exceptionally beautiful point. There is a mitzvah, in brief, to eat the first Pesach in a wrap, according to Hillel's reading, and that's the pasuk we just quoted, pasuk 8 in chapter 12, halfway down page 3, misnumbered to source 5. And there is a mitzvah to eat the Pesach Sheni in a wrap, which was the sources that I really printed on page 1 in the handout, where we looked at Pesach Sheni. Look back at page 1, source 1. Thankfully, they're not misnumbered. In which it says, you should eat them in a wrap altogether. So why does Hillel quote the pasuk of Al Matzos Umrorim Yochluhu of Pesach Sheni rather than of Pesach Rishon, which is the primary source? So there could be a technical answer to this question, which is Hillel wants to bring out the biggest chiddush, the biggest insight, the biggest innovative idea. Because with Pesach Rishon, the mitzvah is to have a wrap, but that includes both the matzah and the maror and the Pesach are of equal status. They both have an independent obligation. Whereas with Pesach Sheni, the Pesach is indeed nullified by two separate mitzvahs which are only attached to it, the Pesach Rishon. So it may be to do the technical nature of the different type of the association of the mitzvahs, as we discussed. But there's a very beautiful thought put forward by the Belzer Rebbe, no less, and I saw this in a Likut Sefer called Sholol Rav, which we have over here, in which he suggests that what's going on over here is in a post-Beis HaMikdash world, which is when we're reading Haggadah, and when a hill is being cited, the pasuk quoted was deliberately Pesach Sheni, representing the hope and the idea that we are saying on the first night of Pesach that maybe we will still be able to eat the Korban Pesach in the correct form as a wrap when we have the opportunity of bringing Pesach Sheni. So to summarize what we've said so far, we've gone through a technical discourse, and I apologize for this, but have a careful reading of the Pesach, and I printed all the sources. It turns out there's a mitzvah to have a wrap on Pesach Rishon, and there's a mitzvah to have a wrap on Pesach Sheni, according to Hillel's reading of the Pesukim. Nonetheless, Hillel quotes, in the way the Gemara cites Hillel, the mitzvah to have the wrap on Pesach Sheni rather than Pesach Rishon, and this is the way, indeed, we read it on the Haggadah. A very strange thing. Why are we proving how we should bring the Korban Pesach on Seder night from Pesach Sheni when we could have proven it from the correct pasuk from Pesach Rishon? Suggested answer that we should read the Haggadah symbolizing we're doing this as a Zeicher L'Mikdash. Unfortunately, Pesach has arrived, and we're unable to eat our Korban Pesach in the wrap form as things should be. But we are optimistic and hopeful and davening that when it gets to Pesach Sheni, by then we will already be able to eat the wrap. Now, so goes the suggestion, which leads us into a consideration of the idea of if Emet Hashem Moshiach indeed comes, would we be able to bring a Pesach Sheni using the concept of Pesach Sheni? Is Pesach Sheni designed for the whole of Klal Yisrael to bring a carbon? And I'll just reference here a couple of sources around what's a complicated matter, and then just share a very interesting thought. Basically, look at the bottom of page 3, source 9, what's mislabeled source 9 in my misnumbering. Bottom of page 3. Gesh Sheniskaya ben Shnei Pesachim, a convert who converts between the two Pesachs. Storich lasis Pesach Sheni Divrei Rebbe. The words of Rabbi Yehuda Nossi are that a convert who converts between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni would bring a Korban Pesach Sheni. Reb Nosson says no. In Storich lasis Pesach Sheni shekavalo nischag Rishon. You don't bring a Pesach Sheni unless you're obligated in a Pesach Rishon. Then the Tosafta says, Nitzon Yisrael livnos Beis HaBechira. What happens if Yisrael was allowed to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash? By the way, it's phrased that way because, according to many halachic opinions, we could rebuild the Mizbeach or rebuild the Beis HaMikdash even without Moshiach coming. And also from a halachic point of view, it maybe we could rebuild the Beis HaMikdash even without Moshiach coming. Hayachid oisa Pesach Sheni. No, you don't bring a Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni is designed for individuals who are unable to bring the carbon, not for the whole of the Jewish people. Rabbi Yehuda says, even the community as a whole brings the Pesach Sheni. Okay, so what we have over here is a dual machlokas. Machlokas number one is, in the words as the Gemara phrases it, is Pesach Sheni a compensation for Pesach Rishon, or is it its own festival? What's the difference between these two models? A non-Jew who converts to Judaism between the two dates. If Pesach Sheni is its own festival, its own opportunity to bring a Korban Pesach, then the non-Jewish convert now has an obligation on Pesach Sheni to bring a Korban. However, if Pesach Sheni is merely a compensation for one who missed Pesach Rishon, we need to ask ourselves the question, did the convert miss Pesach Rishon? No, they didn't. They weren't Jewish at the time. They weren't obligated. And therefore, they wouldn't have a concept of Pesach Sheni. There may be an analogous argument about a boy who becomes a mitzvah, or maybe it's a separate argument because at least he was included in the concept of mitzvahs before, even though he wasn't obligated. He maybe had a kiyum, but not an obligation to do it. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so this is one debate. Then the Gemara has a discussion. Is the concept of Pesach Sheni designed as a solution for individuals, or is the concept of Pesach Sheni designed as can it even work for a whole community who are unable to bring the Korban Pesach? Now, there is a fascinating historical episode around this, and we'll look at this episode in Nach, and then I'll just draw to your attention some modern discussion around this topic. And this is a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim, source 12 on page 4. Vayishlach Yechizkiyahu al Kol Yisrael Yehuda. Chizkiyahu sends a message to Yisrael and Yehuda. Igros Kosav and Ephraim and Menashe, and he wrote letters to Ephraim and Menashe. Lovo lebeis Hashem b'Yushan. Oh yeah, I see I have Yudke Vavke over here, so please, if anyone printed this, make sure you put it in Shemus. Lasis Pesach LaHashem Elokei Yisrael. So he sends a message to the Jewish people that we're going to do a Pesach for the Jewish people. Vayivoit HaMelech v'Sora v'Chol HaKal b'Yushalayim. Lasis HaPesach b'Chodesh HaSheni. And the king and his advisors consult, and they decide to do the Korban Pesach in the second month, in Chodesh Iyar. Why? They couldn't do it at the correct time. There weren't enough priests to sanctify themselves, nor had the people attended Yerushalayim. So historical background to this is as follows. Chizkiyahu ascends the throne, and it's a time of national revival. Chizkiyahu is preceded by his father, who was Menashe, who was a terrible king, who led the Jewish people astray. And Chizkiyahu ascends to the throne and finds a state of disrepair. Jews aren't ascending to Yerushalayim, nor are there enough Kohanim trained already or sanctified to bring the Korban Pesach. So Chizkiyahu announces, we're going to bring the Korban Pesach in the second month this year because we didn't manage to bring it in the first month. So there are two ways to read this pasuk, and the Gemara in Sanhedrin discusses this. Option number one is he decides to make an Adar Sheni. So when it says that he says we're going to bring it in the second month, what he means is we're going to bring it in what you would have thought would be the second month, but in fact it'll be the first month of Nisan, because we're going to make a leap year in which there's a second Adar. That's one way of reading the psukim. But the simplest way of reading the psukim is that this is a national opportunity to bring a Korban Pesach Sheni, in which case, according to this pasuk, and this is one possibility in the Gemara, the Korban Pesach can be brought on a national level if for some reason the nation is unable to bring the Korban the first time around, not because they didn't have a Beis Hamikdash, like we sadly don't have, but because there was a national revival and they were unable to bring the Korban Pesach the first time because of Menashe's neglect of the Jewish people, and therefore they could bring a Korban Pesach the second time. Now, in 5780, so 3 years ago, some I better be careful because I'm being recorded over here, but some of the less moderate of our brethren wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of the time. Does anyone remember who was in 5780? Was it Netanyahu who was the Prime Minister? Or okay, so wrote a letter to whoever was the Prime Minister at the time. I think it was Netanyahu, with a proposal. Why they woke up so late, I'm not entirely sure. With a proposal that the Temple Mount, they should be allowed to build a Mizbeach on the Temple Mount and bring a Korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni. So this was the proposal they came up with. And we're fortunate that they came up with this wacky idea, because it led to someone asking the great Rav Hershel Schachter, the Rosh Yeshiva of YU, what he thought about this idea. And as a result, he wrote a very beautiful piece of Torah, which I printed at the bottom of page 4. Now, again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read it inside, but he says this is a halachically invalid idea. And he is of the opinion that Pesach Sheni is generated by Pesach Rishon. In other words, if you have the Jewish people bringing a Pesach Rishon, and there are some individuals neglected who don't manage to bring it, then they have a Pesach Sheni. He says, in the same way as Shavuos, in a sense, doesn't have a fixed calendar date, but it's 49 days after the bringing of the Omer. He says Pesach Sheni is 30 days after the bringing of the Korban Pesach. But if there's no Korban Pesach brought, then you don't have a concept of Pesach Sheni. In other words, he's adopting the position that La Halacha, Pesach Sheni is a tashlumim, a compensation for a lack of Pesach Rishon, when there's been a Pesach Rishon. But if there's no Pesach Rishon, then there's no Pesach Sheni. Okay. He then goes on to say that this explains the ancient minhag Ashkenaz to say Tachanun on Pesach Sheni. Now, our shul practice is that we don't say Tachanun. You say it at Mincha Erev Pesach Sheni because it's not Pesach. Erev Pesach Sheni, in other words, tomorrow afternoon, it has no significance at all. Friday afternoon is when they would have brought the Korban Pesach. So some say miss out Tachanun on Erev Pesach on Pesach Sheni afternoon. Some even miss it out in the morning. This year, of course, it's irrelevant because it's Friday afternoon. So goes the practice of the Sfardim and the Hasidim. The original Ashkenaz minhag was to say Tachanun on Pesach Sheni. Why do we say Tachanun on Pesach Sheni? Says Rosh Shechter, because there's only a Pesach Sheni when you have a Pesach Rishon in which a carbon has been brought. If there's no Pesach Rishon, there's no Pesach Sheni, and therefore there's no the original minhag Ashkenaz. The original German minhag, which then spread to East Europe. In later times in East Europe and eventually even in West Europe, they began saying Tachanun on. They stopped saying Tachanun. Even Ashkenazim stopped saying Tachanun on Pesach Sheni. Our shul minhag is that we don't say Tachanun. I don't know what the Yekish minhag is, whether monks or the Yagei or Breyers, whether they say Tachanun or not on Pesach Sheni. But the original minhag Ashkenaz was not to say Tachanun. Was to say Tachanun.
Next day is Tachanun every day. Minhag is not to say.
No, but that's what I'm saying. The concept doesn't make sense over here with Mincha. Because the mincha beforehand is not, it's an erev, if you like. The whole of Pesach Sheni is an erev type practice. He then says that he doesn't think there's any reason to eat matzah on Pesach Sheni either. Many have the minhag to eat matzah on Pesach Sheni as a memory of the original Pesach Sheni. He says there's a double mistake over here. The whole mitzvah of eating matzah on Pesach Sheni is only if you're bringing a Korban Pesach, but we're not bringing Korban Pesach. And more than that, there's no Pesach Sheni. We don't have a concept of Pesach Sheni because Pesach Sheni is generated by the absence by Pesach Rishon, which was successfully brought, and there's a few people left behind. They have a concept of Pesach Sheni. So goes his reasoning. I'll just conclude this by saying that there are a number of Hasidic practices. I was doing a little bit of research into this, that's of interest. The Hasidim don't say Tachanun on Pesach. Some don't say it even on Erev Pesach Sheni, as you were just pointing out. Some don't say it for 7 days following Pesach Sheni. Also, they make it as a Pesach of a sort. And others don't say it all the way through the Omer. Also, they have a minhag not to say it at all during Omer because the Omer is the Chanamod that links it. Yes. So us Ashkenazim, who are much more dour folk than our Sfardi and Hasidic brethren, our original minhag was to say Tachanun even on Pesach Sheni, and in recent times that minhag has stopped. But in this very beautiful piece written by Rav Hershel Schachter, he argues that the whole concept of Pesach Sheni only makes sense if you've had a Pesach Rishon, and that in his view, were Moshiach to come, we wouldn't have the opportunity of bringing Pesach Sheni this year. So just to summarize, Pesach Sheni either has a status of an independent Yom Tov in its own right, and either has the status of an independent Yom Tov in its own right, which a ger could bring a Pesach Sheni, and if the Beis Hamikdash was rebuilt, we could build a Pesach Sheni, and if the political extremists would get their way, they could bring a Pesach Sheni, or Pesach Sheni is triggered by the bringing of a Pesach Rishon, and as a compensation, the suggestion that the Haggadah and the Gemara's quoting of Hillel references Pesach Sheni on Seder night rather than Pesach Rishon, because it's our way of saying it's tefillah that we hope that we'll still be able to eat the carbon in a wrap form on Pesach Sheni, and the debate as to whether there is a legitimacy in the minhag to eat matzah on Pesach Sheni. I believe the mainstream minhag is it's not a chiyuv or anything like that, but many people have the practice to try and eat some matzah on Pesach Sheni just as a way of remembering it. Technically speaking, by the way, when should you have the matzah on Pesach Sheni? You should have it on the evening after Pesach Sheni. Nonetheless, the general practice is to have it on the day, and probably the reason is that people won't become confused and think this is a chiyuv, and therefore they don't have it. There are Hasidic groups that have a seder, a mini seder of sorts, on the night after Pesach Sheni, in which they even eat a boiled egg and the like with it. But for our purposes, that sort of brings to close the main things I wanted to mention about Pesach Sheni and share with you this year. Yes, so the Gemara says that only Pesach Sheni is for Yechidim, not for the Tzibur. But the debate is really how to learn that. The reason is because Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur. If you have a whole community which is Tomei, then they can bring the Korban Pesach the first time. It was the Pasuk that says that if you're Tomei, you can't bring the Korban Pesach the first time, is to individuals. If there's a group of people, exactly that Gemara there in Pesachim, if there's a group, then Tumah Hutra B'Tzibur, and they can bring the Pesach. The question, however, is what happens if you have a whole group that's Tomei, and they didn't bring the Korban Pesach? Like, why? Because that's they didn't have a Beis HaMikdash like nowadays. Then would the concept of Pesach Sheni apply to a whole community or not? That's the debate. And the Hasidim adopt the stance that yes, and therefore they treat Pesach Sheni nowadays as a Yom Tov. And Ashkenaz minhag was to adopt the stance that not, and therefore we don't treat Pesach Sheni, unfortunately, as a Yom Tov. Maybe sometimes worth being a little bit Hasidic. I don't know. I've just been quoted saying that, so actually careful. Yes. Okay. I wish everyone thank you for joining, and wish both those of you live and online. Thank you very much. I'll just actually take advantage of the recording then just to put online also the words I just said, which is that there's a philosophical dimension to this also, which is that the morrow, there's only a point in having the morrow if you have it together with the matzah. In other words, the morrow, which has the symbolism of bitterness, there's no point in engaging in bitter experiences unless one has the mitzvah of the Korban Pesach to elevate it as far as Torah law is concerned. And that's the mashava behind the idea, that the philosophical dimension behind the idea that there's only a mitzvah morrow when we, as far as Torah law is concerned, when we actually have a Korban Pesach also.